I'm Takashi Noguchi, teaching at Chuo University, Tokyo. Today I give a lecture at Kyunhee University on the subject, the United Nations and the World Order. My lecture consists of 3 parts. First part is about the 3 roles of the United Nations. Second part, I discuss the 3 versions of global covenant. 3 principal authors of global governance have published a book each, and then I discuss these 3 versions of global governance. Third part, I discuss the future prospect of global governance, centering on the role of the United Nations at a time of transition, at a time of historical juncture of major transition, which seems to be coming in 20-50 years' time from now. Now, back to the first part, 3 roles of the United Nations. As is quite well known, the United Nations plays many multiple roles. First role, which is very important, is nurturing norms and inculcating values and then framing the rules, how people interact with each other, how people help each other. This is called norms and values. And then this is the starting point of the United Nations, because after all, the United Nations started as an organization to fight against fascism, to fight against colonialism, and then came the United Nations Charter, in which the following values are deemed most important, which includes freedom, democracy, equality, human rights, and now more recently anti-terrorism as well. And these set of norms and values and rules, how to nurture, how to maintain, how to frame, how to shape rules, is one of the most important roles of the United Nations has been playing for the last 60 years. And people tend to forget about this, the importance of this role, always thinking that the United Nations should play a most important role in the area of peace and security. But in my view, the most important area where the United Nations has played most effectively is the first area, that is nurturing norms, inculcating values, and framing rules. For instance, the Beijing Conference on Women, held in Beijing in 1995, is a historic conference. The framing rules and norms and values concerning the status, roles, and of women worldwide. And then this has shaped the thinking of all the member countries to a great extent. Some countries go further, other countries may be somewhat slow in coming up with a good agenda as well as implementation. But the important thing is, in this area of norms, values, rules, the United Nations has been playing most effectively, most vigorously, and most consistently, most steadfast fashion. And of course, this is not only in the area of women, gender equality, but also global environment, and then peacekeeping, many other things. But I think this is, we should not forget, the area of this is most important. It doesn't cost much, basically creating the momentum so that the people of the whole world can recognize the issues and try to raise consciousness, awareness, and then design policy in each country to implement it. It's easy to say, but the United Nations' role is to raise the flag. Women, gender equality, environment, human justice, extreme poverty, all kind of agenda. Flagging the slogans are most important functions, and educating each other learning from experience in other societies and then teaching your good experiences to other countries. That is the most important role the United Nations has been playing for many, many years. Second role is provision of economic and social justice. The United Nations has an array of specialized institutions, specialized agencies. Take UNICEF. This agency concerns about children, what they need, what they should be given something, education, medicine, or love, dignity, whatever, schools, hospitals, whatever, textbooks, all that sort of things. This specialized agency, UNICEF, has been doing its work marvelously well, steadfast, consistent, and yet, of course, the budget is limited, but still relying on donations from all over the world, has been performing their mandate splendidly in a most marvelous fashion. Take UNHCR, refugees, United Nations Office, High Commissioner's Office for Refugees. This office has started most modestly, but it has become very large, and then it has become one of the agencies which attracts admiration for its difficult task, and yet quite the dedicated, devoted performance of their mandate, that is helping refugees on the spot. Not easy. Going there, the troubled place, is not easy in the first place, but you go there, you find nothing exists. No food, no medicine, no water, no tents, no shelter, all of sorts of things. And then they keep providing materials and encouragement and help from whatever they can make use of. This is an area the United Nations has been doing marvelously well for the last 60 years. Although people say that other economic international institutions like International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and World Trade Organization have been doing more vigorous work in terms of framing the rules of the economic development, economic policy, trade interactions, investment, intellectual property, and etc. But yeah, that's one area, and that's no less important. But what the United Nations has been doing in this area of giving economic and social justice to those people who are in need, desperately in need, more with human face. UNDP, United Nations Development Program, gives publishes what is called the Human Development Report. Instead of economic development in terms of GDP and Gini index, Human Development Reports gives more human portrait of difficulties of each and every individual who are in need in the global world. Those who are suffering from extreme poverty, and those who need immediate medicine, who are trying to cope with, for instance, AIDS and etc. And UNDP has been doing this kind of work, and UNEP, Environmental Program, has been doing good work in the environmental improvement globally. So this area cannot be played down at all. Kyoto Protocol, in order to prevent global warming from making further deterioration, the Kyoto Protocol has been signed, and some of the countries, many of the countries, are implementing this. But it's not easy one, and especially when the energy consumption has gone up quite steadily in every part of the world. This protocol has to be observed, but at an expense. That is, you may have to slow down the speed of economic development in a developing country, which is quite painful. But despite all this, the United Nations has been helping, encouraging all the countries to observe the Kyoto Protocol. And also education, food, nutrition, hygiene, all of them. WHO, World Health Organization, has been doing great work, the kind of work which the Florence Nightingale started in mid-19th century. The WHO has been doing its good work, very, very professionally, excellent work everywhere. When their work is necessary, they provide help, medicine, staff, and then also training medical doctors, nurses, etc. So all this area cannot be underestimated, especially when compared to the United Nations' role in peace and security. The last one is maintaining peace and security. Of course, the United Nations started as a organization, primarily as an organization to keep peace and security, learning from the failure in the Second World War. Somehow peace was broken, war broke out, and somehow, in order to maintain peace and security, United Nations organization started, and then spirit is continuously kept, and that's why we have the Security Council, and where the major issues are discussed, and some of the issues with consent of 5 major powers, and then other non-permanent members of the Security Council sometimes make resolutions in the General Assembly, and sometimes take actions, military action. Most of the cases, however, the United Nations has been interested in making mediation between those in conflicts. The United Nations induces conflicting parties to talk table, and then when they are fighting, they stand between those parties in conflict, and then let the peace prevail first, at least for talks. And then after talks are materialized in the form of agreement, peace agreement, the United Nations helps those countries to build peace and then start economic development and other matters which come only after the conflict is over. So this function is extremely important, but sometimes the United Nations role is sometimes misunderstood, that somehow maintaining peace and security is the most important. But my point is that world order cannot be maintained without taking care of the other 2 areas, norms, values, rules, as well as economic and social justice. And then United Nations has been playing these roles quite well, despite all the odds that stand in the way of the United Nations. And that is basically the first part. And the second part, I like to talk about global governance, in which, of course, the United Nations has been playing a very important role, but more generally, I like to talk about what is global governance, how this might be realized. Global governance is, of course, how to maintain law and order, how to interact with each other, and how to keep justice prevail, how to keep welfare standards more equal than otherwise, and etc. And then here are 3 versions of global governance which are written by the following 3 persons. One is Anne-Marie Slaughter, Princeton professor. She has written the book Global Governance, in which basically she portrays global governance as if it is already more or less achieved. And her version of global governance is market-driven. The global market somehow adjusts a lot of difficulties and then advances welfare of the world somehow unevenly, but still market is a key driving force to keep global governance going deeper. And sometimes, of course, in this version of market-driven global governance, the international institutions and member state governments play extremely important roles. Without the function of these institutions, international institutions, governmental agencies, and non-governmental groups, the coordination, cooperation among actors involved are sometimes very difficult. So she places enormous emphasis on the roles played by national agencies, international institutions, and non-governmental groups very much. Sometimes this version is called Washington Consensus, evolving around IMF, World Bank, and World Trade Organization. Sometimes the policy tenet is called neoliberalism, the American style. But we cannot emphasize this aspect because, as I explain soon, other 2 versions are not terribly different from each other. Second version is done by Robert Jackson, Global Covenant, which is a kind of maybe called the version of enlightened conservatism, Western various state-centric system. The state sovereignty is emphasized, and then yet somehow the consensus for sovereign states to get along with each other dominates his thinking and about global governance. And here basically prudence, good judgment tend to prevail in running global governance without setting up too many institutions, without imposing some particular ideological tenet. So this is a kind of enlightened conservatism and state sovereignty based international society scheme. Third one is done by David Held, which is more maybe termed as global social democracy driven global governance design. He designs global governance along the line of social democracy on a global scale. He is concerned mostly about gaps between South and North and how to alleviate the problems in the South by the enlightened and progressive policy design by pundits of both sides. And then this is called the global social democracy. And here the United Nations plays a very important role because you have many specialized agencies to reduce the extreme poverty, to reduce the gaps between the South and North, and many other things, very much UN-centered in many ways. And in the second one, the Robert Jackson, this is enlightened conservatism, but since it focuses on sovereign states, member states of the United Nations plays a surely important role here as well. But in all, David Held places most important role to the United Nations, Robert Jackson second, Anne-Marie Slaughter third. she has a very important role for international institutions. But in her case, IMF, World Bank, and World Trade Organization do play much more basic roles than the United Nations. Why I talk about this, the three versions of global governance? It is because the schemes are different, and modus operandi, different ways of doing things, are very, very clear. What we have to do in the coming decades in performing the task of shaping next forthcoming world order is to how to combine, how to mix these and three and other versions of global governance. You have to, each has its own strengths as well as weaknesses. So, and also each person has his or her preferences, which is to my taste. That this one is okay, that one is not okay, but still we have many peoples on the globe, and then somehow in the coming decades we have to combine, mixes some elements with other elements to come up with a good, effective, efficient, and comprehensive world order scheme. Now I'm moving to the third part. That is my bit bold speculation about the way in which next coming order is to materialize. In order to make this speculation, I try to compare two world orders which exist by now. One is Mongolian-led world order in the 12th, 13th century. Mongols unified all the small territories and countries and kingdoms and chieftains territories into one in the 12th, 13th century. And then this is the first universal empire, forgetting for the time being, for the sake of convenience, the Americas, Africa, and then a little bit forget Australia, forget it. But this is the first universal empire we know up until today. And two things are very, very important for us to take note of. One is monetary arrangement. What the currency did they use in order to make commercial transactions? Second is military arrangement. How did they make conquest of other countries? Here, the picture is very, very clear. In terms of the currency, they issued military notes like tickets. As they marched into other territories, they issued military notes. You use without saying much more. So when the Mongols started to lose some of the military power, people in other territories started not to use these military notes. And then this is a very important sign. And that is something we also compare Mongols and the current American system. Militarily, what did the Mongols do? Basically, extremely advanced military technologies and warfare, that using horses and making best use of the instruments on which two legs can be you can stood on these instruments while you are on the horse back. These two instruments, I forgot the English name, but for the time being, this is very important. Unless you use these instruments, which would stabilize your movement, your body, while you are fighting, you cannot fight well. But the Mongols made best use of these instruments while they are on horseback. And also they assembled troops massively, and then they raided the weakest part of the enemy. And then also they made best use of slaughtering people when they were defeated. Basically massacring people en masse without any exception. That gave quite a horror to those defeated, vanquished. And that was one of the ways to prolong the longevity of Mongol conquest. Now, these are quite simplistically the two major features of Mongol world order. You make best use of military conquest and military terror. The second, very selectively, not everywhere, because that would make the life after the war very difficult. There is nothing, no people, no materials, no harvest, food, etc. But that's not what they did. They did very selectively, so that other people can make a note of this. Unless we obey the Mongols, life would be just terrible. So terrorize them. That is first strategy. Second is currency, military notes. Without military notes backed up by gold, which nobody disputes about its value, just keep distributing military notes, issuing military notes. But the important thing is, if military backup erodes slowly, military notes start to lose its popularity. People start not to use military notes. So that's what happened. And according to one Japanese historian, Mongols were able to keep issuing military notes for about 85 years. And that is 12th century, not so long, without backed up gold and other importance, only backed up by military might of the Mongols. Now moving back to the current American-led world system, some may call the American empire. Now two important underpinnings of the current global governance, at least as seen from the United States, are monetary underpinnings. And then second is the military underpinning. Look at the monetary underpinnings. The Bretton Woods system started as a dollar-gold convertibility. That is, dollar can be converted to gold if demand arises. If you need gold, I can give it in gold. That is a system, what is called the Bretton Woods system, started in 1940, immediately after World War II. But the United States had enormous difficulties in keeping this system intact. And during the war in Vietnam, the President Nixon found it impossible to continue this system. Dollar-gold compatibility was abandoned in 1971. So US dollars lost compatibility, the underpinnings that is backing up by gold. It's a similar situation to the Mongol. Mongol started the monetary system where there is no backup from the starting point. But the Americans started a similar kind of system in 1971. Now, if analogy is allowed, 85 years, 71 plus 85, what year is it? I will calculate. Then 1971 plus 85, that is something like mid-21st century. But of course, this is I think it is very difficult to make this kind of historical analogy, because two factors are very, very important. Since 1985, that is the agreement by major powers to lend money to the United States government, which is called the Plaza Agreement, was concluded in 1985. And the lenders of money keep coming up globally from everywhere. And at that time, 1985, major lenders, that is basically purchasing the United States government treasury bonds en masse, buying US dollars, so that the value of US dollars go up somewhat. And right now, many Chinese, many Japanese, and then Saudi Arabian, etc., keep lending money to the United States government. And this keeps United States dominance go on somewhat. So it's qualitatively different from Mongol Empire. In the Mongol case, there are no treasury bonds sold at Ulaanbaatar or whatever. But now we have major lenders somewhere now focusing in East Asia. Amazingly huge amount of money has been purchased every year from in the form of purchase of U.S. Treasury bonds. Second difference is no less important, that is somehow globalization defined as global diffusion of ideas, interests, and institutions, which would enable to have a global market, has been making a great progress for the last 20 or 30 years. And then that makes things very different. This whole Earth looks like more or less the same, similarly treated. So globalization makes enormous difference. Of course, at the time of Mongol Empire, you might as well say globalization at the level of technological standard at that time did make progress deeper and then wider at the time as well. But this time, really, authentically, global market is functioning, and then somehow equalizing effects and then welfare beneficial effects of globalization are visible. Of course, the negative consequences of globalization are visible also. But here, the kind of organization like the United Nations has a great role to play. And I might add a third major difference. International institutions and non-governmental organizations all have become very, very pervasive and very important. And without thinking about their very critical roles to play in terms of making business transactions and then conflict resolution, it is very difficult to compare the Mongol Empire to American Empire or American-led global governance. So in conclusion, what I like to say is that somehow the system which was shaped, created in 1945, and then thereafter some 10 years or 20 years, have started to manifest many negative symptoms. Yet somehow this has to go for a while. It is very difficult to say how many years. One indicator is how long United States military might will remain most predominant. In talking about military predominance, one good indicator is the percentage of the military research and development expenditure over world military weapons research and development expenditures, which is now 85%. United States spends 85% of the military weapons research and development expenditure of all the world. So other countries is not terribly important as far as military weapons are concerned, especially for the future. Military weapons innovation takes place in the cycle with a cycle of 15 or 35 years. So if very dominant percentage of military weapons expenditure is spent by the United States for the next 20, 30 years, American predominance, military dominance is likely to be continue. But our primitive historical analogy says mid 21st century, maybe the time, maybe the historical juncture where world order goes through major transition. Maybe that is the case after 25 years of American military dominance, and some major powers will achieve some competitive might in terms of currency, trade, investment, and also science and technology, discovery and the innovations. And then they may reach a certain stage where they can exert more influence. Then that may happen in the mid-21st century, but still my thinking, speculation is that because of the three major differences, that is major lenders' existence, globalization equalizes, the homogenizes global market, and thirdly, the importance of international and non-governmental institutions make probably this transition less turbulent, that is less problematic. As we go back to the Anne-Marie Slaughter's global governance book, this looks like already global governance has been achieved fairly well. And then probably irrespective of the American military predominance or irrespective of the predominance of the United States dollars, probably transition will be at least not extremely violent, not so turbulent, and that is also maybe my wishful thinking, wishful speculation. But compared to the Mongol Empire, American Empire, or American-led global governance, may make a transition in 30 years, 50 years time, but that will not make a huge disturbance or turmoils global like World War I or World War II. And that ends my lecture. Thank you very much. Shall I speak? Huh?
You did it for 40 minutes.
40 minutes, yeah, fine. I I speak a bit fast.